Before I turn to our witnesses today, I would like to give my colleagues a preview of what is ahead for the committee when we return from the recess. Because of the uncertainty of the timing of the President's budget submission, the committee has made the difficult decision to delay the markup of the NDAA until July, in consultation with Senator Inhofe, the ranking member. The Secretary of Defense, Chairman Milley, and the military services will testify in June. That leaves May to focus on hearings for civilian nominations. We now have 23 nominations or intent to nominate, including 3 military combatant commanders and 2 nominees for the National Nuclear Security Administration. Getting these nominees confirmed as quickly as possible will require many hearings, including possible full committee hearings on Wednesday. And so I ask everyone to be as patient and cooperative as possible while we perform this very necessary oversight duty. Now, one other note, breaking a bit from at least the tradition of the last several months, I would like to take a moment to thank Leah Brewer, the committee nominations and hearings clerk, who has been the main force behind ensuring this committee has kept operating through COVID. She has mastered the technology of the hybrid hearing. Indeed, she's the only one that has. And she has patiently rounded us up off the floor countless times to vote civilian and military nominations out of committee. She's an unsung heroine, and I just wanted to publicly acknowledge her and say how grateful we are. Thank you. Now, turning to the hearing. The committee will receive testimony from Director of National Intelligence Avril Haynes and Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency Lieutenant General Scott Berrier on the worldwide threats facing the United States and our international partners. It is important for the Congress and the American people to hear from the leaders of our intelligence community, and I want to thank you both for being here. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank the men and women under your leadership for their dedication and service to the country. This year's annual threat assessment of the Director of National Intelligence highlights the complexity of the current threat environment. The report finds that the United States and its partners face, quote, a diverse array of threats that are playing out amidst the global disruption resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic and against the backdrop of great power competition, the disruptive effects of ecological degradation, and a changing climate, an increasing number of empowered non-state actors, and rapidly evolving technology. The interconnected nature of these threats will drive how we resource and transform our tools of national power, not only military, but also diplomatic, economic, and informational. To respond to these complex security challenges, we need to do all of these things. The United States and its democratic allies and partners are increasingly challenged by states and non-state actors that do not accept the international norms that have underpinned our security and helped keep the peace for decades. A recent report published by the Director of National Intelligence sought to project global trends over the next 20 years and found that accelerating shifts in military power, demographics, economic growth, environmental conditions, and technology, as well as hardening divisions over governance models, are likely to further ratchet up competition between China and a Western coalition led by the United States. It is against this background that the Department of Defense has appropriately identified China as the pacing threat for the United States military. At the same time, we must avoid contributing to a perception that China is 10 feet tall. I hope our witnesses today will also describe the challenges facing China, including demographic, economic, and governmental, and how the United States and our extensive network of allies and partners can best take advantage of them in the coming years. Russia is utilizing a whole-of-government approach to accelerate competition and advance its interests, notably via disinformation campaigns, assassination attempts, cyber espionage, and the use of mercenary groups in numerous countries around the world. I hope our witnesses will help us more fully understand the extent of Russia's malign actions, as well as areas where our partners and allies would benefit from greater U.S. support as they work to bolster their capacity to resist such hybrid threats. The rogue regimes in Iran and North Korea will continue to demand attention and resources from the intelligence community and Department of Defense. And I'm interested in understanding how the intelligence community views the threat posed by Iran, including their nuclear program and destabilizing activities in the region. and how those actions may constrain the Biden administration's diplomatic efforts. With respect to North Korea, I hope our witnesses will help frame the challenge we are facing from Kim Jong-un, what we may expect in the way of provocative actions, and what leverage we may have to effect a change in the behavior of that regime. As we heard from the commanders of U.S. Central and Africa commands last week, the threat posed by violent extremist groups persists. While President Biden has announced the transition of forces out of Afghanistan by September 11, 2021, we must maintain the capability to continue to degrade al-Qaeda, ISIS, and other terrorist groups and prevent attacks on the homeland. I'm interested in hearing from the witnesses as to what measures would be most effectively used to contain these threats from these groups. Now, turning briefly to the cyber threats we face, hardly a week passes between revelations of serious breaches by our principal adversaries and criminals against federal, state, and local government institutions and private sector enterprises. While most nation-state cyber intrusions against the United States involve theft of information, they also demonstrate the potential for destructive attacks by our adversaries on a larger scale. And I hope our witnesses will share their candid concerns about these threats and help us think through the best ways to confront them. Once again, let me thank you for being here this morning. I look forward to your testimony. And I will, before I turn it over to Ranking Member Inhofe, remind my colleagues that there will be an informal classified briefing immediately following this session in the Office of Senate Security, SV 217. Ranking Member Inhofe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since its release in 2018, the committee's top priority has been ensuring that we implement the National Defense Strategy, and if we're serious about the security of the United States, we need the resources to make this NDS happen. The President's budget request does not meet this standard. It doesn't even keep up with inflation. Our top military commanders have bluntly told us in recent weeks that the threats to the United States are growing at an alarming rate. To cut the defense budget in the midst of these challenges is not just misguided, it's dangerous. Over the past several years, this committee has been repeatedly warned of the pace and the scope of Russia and China and their nuclear modernization. Just last week, the commander of the U.S. Strat Command told this committee that Russia has completed over 80% of its nuclear force modernization. They've been busy. He also stated that China has reached, and he used the word, quote, he said, inflection point, where it is accelerating its nuclear and modernization efforts and will reach operational parity with the United States in the 2030s. At the same time, China's modernization of its conventional forces is accelerating at a startling pace. They are outpacing us in developing critical technologies like hypersonics, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing. For a long time, most Americans believed that we had the best of everything, and that was something that was kind of took hold after the Second World War, and that was pretty true. But it's not true now. For a long time, that it was the case, but now it's not. At the same time, China's military ambitions are now global. They are building bases and deploying advanced capabilities in places like Africa, and what the AFRICOM commander called, quote, the number one global power competition. So as China accelerates military capability, Putin has not been dormant, as we've seen in the buildup of Russian forces around the Ukraine and all of his activities there. We need to understand that the globalization of China, China's aggression, Russian intimidation, as well as the seriousness of our other threats we face around the world. So I look forward to the testimony, and I have two really critical questions I'll be asking our witnesses, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Inhofe. And before I recognize the witnesses, let me again remind my colleagues this is a hybrid hearing. We will not follow the early bird rule. We will follow a seniority in terms of recognition. Standard 5-minute questioning round is in effect, and would ask people to keep their eyes on the clock. Finally, to allow everyone to participate fully, would ask all colleagues to please mute your microphone if you are not speaking. Let me begin with Director Haynes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Inhofe, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to offer the intelligence community's 2021 assessment of worldwide threats to U.S. national security. On behalf of the entire intelligence community, but particularly those elements that sit within the Department of Defense, I want to express to you how much we appreciate your support and your partnership. I would also like to take advantage of this moment to thank the men and women of the intelligence community. Their efforts rarely receive public accolades because of the nature of their work, but they do help to keep us safe, often at great personal sacrifice. And we remain committed to providing them with the resources our mission requires and the support we owe them. It's my honor to serve alongside these dedicated officers and leaders, including General Berrier, and to represent their work to you. Our goal today is to convey to you and the public we serve and protect the threat environment as we perceive it, and to do our best to answer the questions about the challenges we face. I'll only highlight a few points and provide some context in my opening statement. For a more detailed threat picture, I refer you to the annual threat assessment we issued earlier this month, which is a reflection of the collective insights of the intelligence community. Broadly speaking, the intelligence community is focused on traditional categories of issues that we've been discussing for years: adversaries and competitors, critical transnational threats, and conflicts and instability. And I'll summarize our views on these, but first I want to take note of the shifting landscape we see today and the implications that has for our work. The trends underlying and intersecting these issues are increasing the pace, the complexity, and the impact of these threats in ways that require us to evolve. During the past year, the COVID-19 pandemic demonstrated the inherent risks of high levels of interdependence, and in coming years, as reflected in our recently issued Global Trends report that was just discussed, we assess that the world will face more intense and cascading global challenges, ranging from disease to climate change to disruptions from new technological and financial crises. And as we note in that report, these challenges will repeatedly test the resilience and adaptability of communities, states, and the international system, often exceeding the capacity of existing systems and models. This looming disequilibrium between existing and future challenges and the ability of institutions and systems to respond is likely to grow and produce greater contestation at every level. And for the intelligence community, this insight compels us to broaden our definition of national security, to develop and integrate new and emerging expertise into our work, deepen and strengthen our partnerships, and learn to focus on the long-term strategic threats while simultaneously addressing the urgent crises. In short, at no point has it been more important to invest in our norms, our institutions, our workforce, and the integration of our work. And doing so provides us with the opportunity to meet the challenges we face, to pull together as a society, and to promote resilience and innovation. And as we evolve, you will see our efforts to more effectively integrate longer-term destabilizing trends into our daily work, thereby promoting strategic foresight and a deeper understanding of the threats we face, which we hope will help the policy community effectively prioritize their work to address the issues that we seek to present. Against this backdrop, the annual threat assessment describes an array of threats we are facing in the coming year, beginning with those emanating from key state actors. I'll begin with China, which is an unparalleled priority for the intelligence community, and then move to Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And China increasingly is a near-peer competitor, challenging the United States in multiple arenas, while pushing to revise global norms in ways that favor the authoritarian Chinese system. China is employing a comprehensive approach to demonstrate its growing strength and compel regional neighbors to acquiesce in Beijing's preferences, including its claims over disputed territory and assertions over the sovereignty over Taiwan. It also has substantial cyber capabilities that, if deployed at a minimum, can cause localized temporary disruptions to critical infrastructure inside the United States. And while China poses an increasingly formidable challenge to the U.S. role in global affairs, it is worth noting, as the chairman did, that its economic, environmental, and demographic vulnerabilities all threaten to complicate its ability to manage the transition to the dominant role it aspires to in the decades ahead. And next, with respect to Russia, we assess Moscow will continue to employ a variety of tactics to undermine U.S. influence and erode Western alliances. While Russia does not want a conflict with the United States, Russian officials have long believed that Washington is seeking to weaken Russia, and Moscow will use a range of tools to pursue its objectives, including mercenary operations, assassinations, and arms sales. It will also employ, as we've reported, new weapons and cyber capabilities to threaten the United States and its allies, and seeks to use malign influence campaigns, including in the context of U.S. elections, to undermine our global standing, sow discord, and influence U.S. decision-making. Russia is becoming increasingly adept at leveraging its technological prowess to develop asymmetric options in both the military and cyber spheres in order to give itself the ability to push back and force the United States to accommodate to its interests. And turning to Iran, Tehran is seeking to project power in neighboring states, deflect international pressure, and minimize threats to regime stability. Iraq will be a key battleground for Iranian influence in the coming year, but Tehran will also continue to pursue a permanent military presence in Syria, destabilize Yemen, and threaten Israel. And for its part, North Korea may take aggressive and potentially destabilizing actions to reshape its security environment and will seek to drive wedges between the United States and its allies. These efforts could include the resumption of nuclear weapons and intercontinental ballistic missile testing in the future. When it comes to transnational threats, the assessment focuses on key issues that intersect with the state actor threats that I just outlined, starting with COVID-19. The effects of the current pandemic will obviously continue to strain governments and societies over the coming year, fueling humanitarian and economic crises, political unrest, and geopolitical competition as countries such as Russia and China seek advantage through vaccine diplomacy to build influence and, in some cases, demand accessions from other governments. Countries with high debts or that depend on oil exports, tourism, or remittances face particularly challenging recoveries, while others will turn inward and be distracted by other challenges. The critical impact of the pandemic has also served to highlight the importance of public health to national security. Ecological degradation and a changing climate will continue to fuel disease outbreaks, threaten food and water security, exacerbate political instability and humanitarian crises. And although much of the effect of a changing climate on U.S. security will play out indirectly in a broader political and economic context, warmer weather can generate direct, immediate impacts, for example, through more intense, frequent, and variable extreme weather events, in addition to driving conflicts over scarce natural resources. The changing climate, conflict, and economic deprivation will drive vulnerable populations from their homes, heightening humanitarian needs and increasing the risk of political upheaval. The scourge of illicit drugs and transnational organized crime will continue to take its toll on American lives, prosperity, and safety. Major narcotics trafficking groups and other transnational organized criminal organizations will continue to drive threat streams while also being used by adversaries employing cyber tools to steal from U.S. and foreign businesses and use complex financial schemes to launder illicit proceeds, undermining confidence in financial institutions. Emerging and disruptive technologies, as well as the proliferation and permeation of technology in all aspects of our lives, pose unique challenges. And cyber capabilities, to illustrate, are demonstrably intertwined with threats from our infrastructure to foreign malign influence threats against our democracy. And we need, as many of you have stressed to us, to focus on the competition in critical technical areas such as high-performance computing, microelectronics, biotechnology, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, fiber optics, and metamaterials. And with regard to global terrorism, ISIS and al-Qaeda remain the most pressing threats to U.S. interests overseas. These groups seek to conduct attacks inside the United States, but sustained counterterrorism pressure has broadly degraded their capabilities. Domestically, lone actors and small cells with a broad range of ideological motivations pose a greater immediate threat. We see this threat manifest itself in individuals who are inspired by al-Qaeda and ISIS, often called homegrown violent extremists, and those who commit terrorist acts for ideological goals stemming from other influences such as racial bias and anti-governmental sentiment, which we refer to as domestic violent extremism, or DVE. And DVE, an increasingly complex threat that is growing in the United States. These extremists often see themselves as part of a broader global movement, and in fact, a number of other countries are experiencing a rise in DVE. For example, Australia, Germany, Norway, and the United Kingdom consider white racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists, including neo-Nazi groups, to be the fastest growing terrorist threat that they face. And of course, regional conflicts continue to fuel humanitarian crises, undermine stability, and threaten U.S. persons and interests. The fighting in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria has a direct implication for U.S. forces, while tensions between nuclear-armed India and Pakistan remain a concern for the world. The iterative violence between Israel and Iran, the activity of foreign powers in Libya, and the conflicts in other areas, including Africa and the Middle East, have the potential to escalate or spread. And Asia has periodic upheavals as the Burmese military seizure of power in February. Latin America has contested elections, and violent popular protests are likely to continue to produce volatility, while Africa will continue to see ongoing marginalization of some communities, ethnic conflict, and contentious elections. In closing, we face a broad array of longstanding and emerging threats whose intersection is raising the potential for cascading crises. Our increasingly interconnected and mobile world offers enormous opportunities, but at the same time, it multiplies our challenges, calling us to even greater vigilance as we seek to protect our vital national interests, promote resilience, and invest in our institutions and our people, who will be the only and best answer to addressing these challenges. And investing in our workforce means taking care of our people, and we are committed to doing so. The intelligence community is currently focused on supporting the retrograde that will occur as we withdraw from Afghanistan by ensuring that we provide the best intelligence to support the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman's work as they bring our forces home in a safe, orderly, and deliberate way. And taking care of our people also means investigating the source of anomalous health incidents that have affected our personnel and caring for those affected. We appreciate the support that many of you have shown for our personnel, as with everything else we work on around the globe, and we look forward to answering your questions about these and other worldwide threats. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director. General Berrier, please.
Good morning, Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Inhofe, and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the threats facing this nation and DIA's support to the National Defense Strategy. The nature and scope of the national security environment in which we operate is largely shaped by strategic competition, the continuous push and pull among the United States, China, and Russia for global strength and influence. DIA's cadre of remarkable personnel works diligently to provide the integrated defense intelligence picture, providing the U.S., along with our allies, a decision advantage across all warfighting domains and geographic boundaries, with competitors who intend to challenge, limit, or exceed our military lead. Their capabilities include more lethal ballistic and cruise missiles, growing nuclear stockpiles, and gray zone measures such as ambiguous unconventional forces, foreign proxies, information manipulation, cyber attacks, economic coercion. Advances in materials, high-performance computing, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology will augment potential adversaries' military and technological capabilities. The evolving threat from the COVID-19 pandemic has also had major implications for our national security. China and Russia are using COVID-19 circumstances to conduct information warfare aimed at undermining Western governments, attacking coalitions, and compelling economic and political outcomes in their favor. China remains the long-term strategic competitor to the United States. As a pacing threat, it poses a major security challenge. Beijing views the international environment and its ties to Washington as increasingly adversarial. It uses multiple approaches, including diplomatic, economic, espionage, and the military to achieve its strategic aims. China continues its decades-long military modernization to build an increasingly lethal force that will almost certainly be able to hold U.S. and allied forces at greater risk and greater distances from the Chinese mainland. The Russian military is an existential threat to the United States. Russia has a growing ability to project power with long-range precision cruise missiles, and its military leaders are incorporating lessons from Russia's involvement in Syria into training and exercises as they improve their joint forces. Moscow investment in conventional forces, strategic nuclear forces, and in enhancement of strategic deterrent places the U.S. homeland at risk. Russia seeks to dominate its periphery through whole-of-state efforts. Both China and Russia consider space integral to winning wars and have reorganized their militaries to integrate space operations and space counter-space capabilities. In addition to these two state actors, North Korea also poses a serious challenge to the United States and our allies. Pyongyang did not abandon its nuclear or long-range missile test programs as it pursued diplomatic engagement to soften international support for sanctions. Since mid-2019, it has tested dozens of missiles, including 3 types of new short-range ballistic missiles and a new sea-launched ballistic missile. In the Middle East, Iran is the primary state challenger to the U.S. interest because of its sophisticated military capabilities, broad proxy and partner networks, and periodic willingness to use force against U.S. and partner forces. Iran's security strategy aims to ensure continuity of clerical rule, maintain internal stability, secure dominant regional power status, and achieve economic prosperity. In South Asia, violence in Afghanistan remains elevated as peace negotiations have slowed since the initiation in late 2020. Talks are highly unlikely to result in extended ceasefires or violence reduction while the Taliban continues to apply military pressure on the Afghan government. At the same time, the threat from terrorist organizations will persist. ISIS remains the preeminent Salafi jihadist group, sustaining more than a dozen insurgencies globally. It is expanding its African presence and probably rebuilding its ability to direct attacks against the West. Al-Qaeda's appeal to Salafist jihadists has waned since ISIS's emergence, and counterterrorism pressure has eliminated many of Al-Qaeda's senior leaders. Transnational racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists, or REMV, organizations operate across borders and attract recruits and spread ideology online. The United States will increasingly face advanced, persistent, and sophisticated cyber attacks from an array of state and non-state actors, adversarial probing and exploitation of military and intelligence networks, efforts to coerce our personnel and monitor U.S. force movement, and attempts to steal weapon system technology are all threats. Today's threat environment reflects rapid, significant technological change and adversarial challenges in every operating domain. I am committed to ensuring DIA is positioned to meet these challenges through the efforts in such areas as modernization of the top-secret IT network DIA manages for the DoD and the intelligence community, building advanced modeling and simulation capabilities, and creating a data environment that will enhance and enrich how we provide foundational military intelligence to warfighters and decision makers. Your support of the exceptional DIA enterprise enables us to provide an integrated defense intelligence picture which gives the nation and our allies a decision advantage. I am privileged and proud to lead DIA and its outstanding workforce. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I, along with the director, look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, General. Let me direct a question to both the director and to General Berrier. There has been a public debate about our commitment to Taiwan. Right now, we maintain the practice of strategic ambiguity. There are others that urge us to take explicit action in the case of any Chinese demands against Taiwan. Starting with Director Haynes, how would you evaluate China and Taiwan's reaction to a change in our policy by adopting explicit commitments?
Thank you, Chairman. From our perspective, if we were to see a U.S. shift from strategic ambiguity, as you've identified it, to clarity over a willingness to intervene in a Taiwan contingency, that the Chinese would find this deeply destabilizing. I think it would solidify Chinese perceptions that the U.S. is bent on constraining China's rise, including through military force, and would probably cause Beijing to aggressively undermine U.S. interests worldwide. That would be our assessment.
And the reaction in Taiwan, would that precipitate a surge towards further separation from China?
I think that's possible. I would say that already Taiwan is hardening to some extent towards independence as they're watching essentially what happened in Hong Kong, and I think that is an increasing challenge.
Thank you. General, your comments, please.
Chairman, from a DIA perspective, we understand that is a goal for Xi to unify Taiwan with China. We don't know that he's actually made a decision on how or when to do that. We have seen an increase in PLA activity on the sea and in the airspace around Taiwan over the last year. With everything going on in China right now, and I'm thinking Hong Kong, Tibet, also the Uyghur issue. I think these are one of the key core issues that we have to deal with as we watch China.
Just a quick follow-up. Some have suggested, I think Admiral Davidson, who was here, is that there's a critical time frame between now and 2030 in terms of Taiwan, 6 years, because his interpretation, as I recall, was after that demographic issues, economic issues start playing a more predominant role in Chinese policy. So is there any sense, Director Haynes, of a timing issue here, or a period of vulnerability for?
I think maybe we can discuss this further in closed session.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank you. And Director Haynes, again, in your testimony in your confirmation hearing, you indicated the support for a Foreign Malign Influence Response Center, which would be a whole-of-government effort. Where are we on that regard? What status can you give us?
Thank you, Chairman. So we have begun to try to establish essentially an outline of what this would look like. Been working with the intelligence community more broadly to make sure that what we do at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence isn't sort of a redundancy of what's already being done in different components, but rather is an opportunity for us to coordinate this work across the community, provide coordinated assessments to policymakers, and ultimately provide some expertise that might be valuable, again, across the community where it may be filling gaps that certain components don't have, things along those lines. But we are moving with alacrity towards that, and if you'd like further information on this, we can give it to you as we're sort of forming it effectively.
Thank you. Now, there's been some discussion about a social media data threat analysis center, since social media is playing a role, critical role in everything we do, it seems. Any thoughts on the possibility of standing something like that up?
Thank you. I think I'm not aware of a plan to do that more generally. That may be the case in other departments and agencies. I would say that we would expect that open source information will be a critical aspect of what we would, essentially analyze in the context of a Foreign Malign Influence Center, and we obviously have open source centers across the community that work on these issues.
Thank you. My time has expired, General Berrier, but I want to commend DIA for taking the lead in integrating artificial intelligence and other techniques into our intelligence gathering, and we'll have an opportunity in a closed session to discuss those issues. Thank you very much. Senator Inhofe, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I said in my opening statement, we have been repeatedly warned in this committee about what Russia and China are doing in terms of their nuclear modernization, and frankly, what we haven't been doing over the last many years. Last week, the Strat Commander talked about over 80% of the nuclear force that Russia has actually excelled, and China has reached what they call the inflection point. So, General Berrier, a recent report that by the Independent Institute for Defense Analyses concluded that neither China, Russia, nor North Korea would view the United States' adoption of a no first use policy on nuclear weapons as credible. They just wouldn't believe us. And as a result, the United States' adoption of a no first use nuclear policy would likely have little or no impact on their nuclear ambitions or policies. But what it would do is significantly undermine the confidence of our allies in the United States security guarantees. So I'd ask you, General Berrier, first of all, do you agree with this assessment? And then do you know of any organization, any intelligent assessment that you're aware of that would contradict these conclusions?
Senator Inhofe, I am not aware of any current intelligence that has been produced lately that discusses that topic. I believe that the Russians and Chinese evaluate their own deterrent capabilities, and they look at threats broadly across the globe and make decisions about their nuclear force just the same way we do.
Mm-hmm. In your personal opinion?
My opinion is that any statement we make probably would not have a significant impact on how they view their nuclear force.
Thank you very much. Now, the committee heard last week from AFRICOM, the General Townsend, that China views Africa as a key power projection platform for its military. And I believe that's true. China's built for the first, up until just about 2 or 3 years ago, China didn't do anything outside of its own limits. But now, of course, they got busy down in Djibouti. I've been down there. I've flown over that area. I know what they're doing down there. It's aggressively pursuing a naval base on the west coast of Africa that would give China an enduring military presence in the Atlantic. And General Townsend called this his #1 global power competition concern. General Berrier, do you agree with General Townsend that China views Africa as a key power projection platform for its military?
Senator, I believe the Chinese, in order to safeguard their Belt Road Initiative, will in place military forces where they see they need that kind of capability. Africa is certainly one of those places where they have done that. The interesting thing about the way they look at Africa is sort of this long-term developmental approach which will allow them over a long period to put more forces there. So I do agree with General Townsend, but in the extent that Africa is one area where strategic competition will play out, it will also play out in Latin America and South America, and wherever they extend their markets, you will find that activity.
Mm-hmm. That activity, but staying with Africa, we're talking about East and West Africa, their activities. This is something that is not, it's something that's fairly new, and I would agree with your comments on that as well as General Townsend. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Inhofe. Let me now recognize Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for your testimony this morning and for your very good work. Director Haynes, I would like to begin with you because I'm sure you've seen the report on CNN today that suggests that there were at least 2 possible incidents on U.S. soil of the directed energy attacks that have created symptoms sometimes called Havana syndrome in a number of our personnel. One of the incidents described here happened on the Ellipse in late 2020, and that's very close to the White House. So I'm not going to ask you if that report is correct or not, because I recognize that there has been a real effort to try and keep this information classified. But I do want to ask you about the concern that I have that that kind of clamp down on information that's available to Congress, that's available to the public, has led to leaks, and it's not clear whether the information we're getting is correct or incorrect. And so I wonder if you could speak to that and to what more can be done to declassify some of that information, share it with members of Congress in a way that allows us to better respond. After all, we have to fund operations, and there are a lot of personnel, not a lot, there are personnel who have been harmed who we need to make sure get the care and benefits they need.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for your attention on this issue. It's critically important, and it's something that I know General Berrier, I know across the intelligence community, frankly, leaders are focused on this issue. On your particular question with respect to information, I'd be happy to look at this with you, to be honest. I think I completely understand getting the information is critical for you to be able to respond to these issues and ensure that you're able to make good decisions. Maybe we can talk more about this also in closed session on these questions. And I think, our concern obviously with the classification is because we believe that either it's protecting sources or methods and it's critical to our national security, and we'll have to figure that out with you, but you should certainly have access to the classified information, and we should figure out if there's a way to help you address these issues more generally.
Well, again, I would argue that with stories like this, with stories that have appeared over the last 2 years, really, and those people who have been affected, who have gone public, that the horse is out of the barn on this. The information is already out there, and I think it behooves us all to try and make sure that the information that gets out is accurate and that people understand what's happening and that there is an effort to respond to that. So I would urge you to consider that. And as we're talking about classification, I should also thank your office for providing a declassified assessment of the impact of our withdrawal in Afghanistan on the Afghan women. It's something that I requested, and I appreciated that we got that yesterday or the day before. So thank you for doing that. Unfortunately, it shows that, or it suggests that there's a real threat that faces women and girls in Afghanistan after we withdraw. But I really, in my limited time, I want to go to Syria, because one of the real challenges that I believe we're still facing there is the detainee camps that have tens of thousands of people, and some of them in the Al-Hol camp in northeast Syria. We know that there are ISIS leaders who are still there, who are raising a whole nother generation of potential terrorists. And I understand the Kurds just did an operation there to try and root out some of those ringleaders. But we also, 2 years ago, put into the NDAA a position to create a detainee coordinator to try and help get some of these detainees repatriated to the countries that they came from. No one has been appointed to that position yet, and I believe that continues to be a real threat. And the more we can do in cooperation with our allies in the international community to respond to that, the better we're going to address that potential threat. So I would urge you to take a look at that. And if you could report back to the committee about what the plan is for that detainee coordinator.
Thank you, Senator. I suspect that's a detainee coordinator at the Department of Defense. Is that right, ma'am?
It is.
Okay. I'll work, obviously, with the Secretary of Defense, and we'll work through.
Yeah. I'm assuming you all talk to each other, so.
We do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Let me recognize via WebEx Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Berrier, BIA's 2018 report on the global nuclear landscape stated that Russia is, quote, updating its warhead production complex and is producing what we assess to be hundreds of nuclear warheads each year. The following year, your predecessor, General Ashley, stated that, quote, Russia claims to be developing new warhead designs for strategic systems, such as a new high-yield, earth-penetrating warhead to attack hardened military targets like the U.S., Allied, and Chinese command and control facilities, end quote. Did these assessments remain valid, and has there been any decrease or reduction in terms of warhead design or production activities taking place?
Senator, those assessments remain valid today, and I'd be happy to go into more detail in a closed session.
Thank you. Also, General Ashley stated, quote, the United States believes that Russia probably is not adhering to the nuclear testing moratorium in a manner consistent with the yield or with the zero yield standard. The United States, by contrast, is upholding a zero yield standard, end quote. He went on to indicate that China was also not adhering to the same zero yield approach to nuclear testing that the United States observes. Does that still remain DIA's assessment?
It does, Senator.
Director Haynes, is there anything that you would like to add to this?
No, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. General Berrier, in your prepared testimony, you described chemical and biological threats from Russia and North Korea in particular, but also China. Can you broadly characterize chemical and biological threats? Are they significant? Are there trends that you can share? Is the threat increasing or decreasing, for example?
Senator, what I can say in open testimony is that those countries that were mentioned in the assessment do have active programs. We monitor those very, very carefully in a number of sensitive ways, and we've actually seen the Russians use some of their latest weapons on individuals recently. So we can go into more detail in a closed session.
Okay. It also notes that China's chemical infrastructure and Russia's pharmaceutical-based agents program can provide those nations with chemical and biological capabilities, respectively. Can you talk a bit more about the dual-use nature of an industrial capability and how that can also support a military capability?
Senator, the dual-use nature of some of those technologies to produce pharmaceuticals and chemical and biological weapons are intertwined very closely, and it's sometimes difficult to discern the real true intent behind some of those facilities. But beyond that, I can go into more detail in the closed session.
Also, sir, in your prepared testimony, you note that Russia has restarted production of long-range missile delivery platforms, that they are fielding ultra-quiet cruise missile submarines, and they are investing heavily in hypersonic weapons. What is your overall assessment of Russia's long-range conventional strike capabilities? And is this a reflection of a desire or a strategy that involves holding the homeland at risk below the threshold of nuclear conflict?
Senator, the Russians can hold the U.S. homeland at risk below that threshold. They have invested heavily in modernizing a number of niche capabilities and weapons that you mentioned, and they continue to develop those weapons, even in a constrained financial environment. And the hydrocarbon market at its lower rate continues to challenge their ability to fund their programs.
Director Haynes, do you have anything to add on these points?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Now I'd like to recognize Senator King via WebEx.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Haynes, I'd like to ask you a question I ask pretty much every foreign policy leader that we have before this committee. What is your analysis of what China's goals are? What does China want?
Thank you, Senator. Well, obviously, I'm not here as a foreign policy analyst, but regardless, I'm happy to give you a sense of how the analysts perceive it. I think, as a general matter, China sees itself as rising and sees the United States as declining and is not interested in going to war, but perceives that as a concern as these trajectories, from their perspective, pass each other in a sense. And in that context, China believes that the United States is trying to check China's rise, and in that context is countering, from their perspective, again, what they perceive to be our influence and our efforts in this area. I think in their perception, they are increasingly perceiving it as a zero-sum game, and that promotes, in a sense, their efforts to really push us out in a way, and to be a threat across a range of factors and see us as a threat to them in that context.
Let me change the subject. To what extent, and you mentioned this in your opening testimony and in your written statement, expand a bit on climate change as a national security concern. The one I'm particularly concerned about is incipient migration from areas of the world that become essentially uninhabitable because of drought, famine, extreme heat. Do you see this as a threat multiplier, as a serious national security concern, as well as, of course, an environmental concern?
I do, absolutely. I mean, I think part of the challenge for us is recognizing that climate change has just enormous impact in every aspect of our lives and with respect to almost every threat that we're facing, is figuring out how to actually embed and integrate climate science and analysis, essentially, across the board of our intelligence community work so that we can ensure that we're actually lifting up the places where it's, in fact, having that kind of impact. So to your point, without question, The impact the climate is having on migration is something that we've written about within the intelligence community, the trend lines that produces, the concerns that creates. Another example is in the context of increased droughts and sort of the shifting boundaries of dry areas. What you see is that affects agriculture, that in turn creates tension that can drive conflict, for example. That's another aspect of it. You see increasing floods. That's obviously a challenge for countries around the world, particularly ones that don't have the resilience to react to them in a way that allows them to continue, and can actually promote fractures of society as a consequence over time. So there's so many different aspects and dimensions to this challenge, and what we've been trying to do is ensure that we can actually bring in that expertise and integrate it effectively and make it available across the community so that we can integrate that work into our daily work, in effect, while also looking at the long-term trends that it produces.
And of course, historically, access to arable land has been the cause of wars throughout our history. We've pivoted largely from a focus on terrorism to peer and near-peer state competition, and I understand that, and I think that's appropriate. I'm still concerned, however, about the terrorist threat, and the particular one that keeps me up at night is terrorist access to a nuclear device, either through development or more likely through purchase. Deterrence has protected us from a nuclear conflict for 70 years. Deterrence wouldn't work with a terrorist organization. Talk to me about the role of intelligence in protecting us from the nightmare of a nuclear weapon in the hold of a tramp steamer bound into the port of New York or Miami.
Yeah, absolutely, Senator. And I know you know a fair amount about how we work on these issues, particularly given your role on the Intelligence Committee. I would say that part of the effort in, as you say, the rebalance, in effect, recognizing the rise of state-to-state competition is not taking your eye off the ball of non-state actor and transnational threats, including terrorism. And that is absolutely something that we're committed to. And in the context of, in particular, terrorist groups, we monitor and try to track them to the best degree that we can. It's a diffuse issue, as you know, spanning many regions of the globe. We are, in particular, looking for the kinds of weapons that they can use that give them extraordinary capacity to have catastrophic effects. And we look to ensure that we understand those networks as best we can and then provide whatever warning we're capable of providing under the circumstances. I think beyond that, we can obviously talk further in closed session.
Thank you. I think the attackers on September 11th killed 3,000 people. They would have killed 3 million if they could have. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator King. And now via WebEx, Senator Cotton, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Berrier, you stated in your testimony submitted ahead of this hearing that we had previously expected China to double their nuclear stockpile by the end of the decade, but both you and Admiral Richard have now testified for the committee that PLA is going to exceed that estimate. Why do you think the PLA is so rapidly building up its nuclear arsenal? Is it to defend its homeland, deter perceived regional threats, or to project power globally?
Senator Cotton, thank you for the question. Broadly speaking, China's rise has also included this massive military modernization. And in the span of capabilities that they have, the nuclear piece has been one component. It has been a priority for them. And I think they have racked and stacked that in the things that they think that they need to get done by 2030 or 2035. And so I think they have accelerated this as a deterrent, quite honestly.
Why do you state that the Chinese government tends to keep its nuclear forces in a launch on warning posture? And how is that a change from previous assessments of China's nuclear forces?
Senator Cotton, I think the Chinese military, through their modernization and training efforts, have undergone a lot of exercises where they try to understand what gives them the most viable capability the quickest. And I think this is an evolution of their training and doctrine.
Is China capable of arming its hypersonic glide vehicles with nuclear warheads? And if so, what kind of risk does that pose to the United States and our interests?
The answer to that question is yes, and that poses a significant risk.
Could you explain why it poses that significant risk?
The speed at which those weapons travel makes it very, very difficult to track in their entire trajectory. We could go into more detail, Senator, in a closed session.
As compared to a traditional ballistic missile?
Correct.
Okay, let's turn to Russia. You testified in your written statement that Russia now claims to have modernized over 80% of its own nuclear triad, including silent submarines, new strategic bombers, and an upgraded ICBM force. How does the Russian ICBM force now compare to that of the United States in terms of modernization?
Senator, I'd prefer to discuss that in a closed session.
Okay. Have the Russians created or fielded a hypersonic glide vehicle that's capable of matching up to a nuclear warhead?
Senator, they're in the process of doing that right now.
That pose the same risks that China's hypersonic glide vehicles, if armed with nuclear weapons, would, correct?
Yes.
Well, we're on the topic of Russia. In 2019, General Ashley indicated that Russia is violating the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And last year, the Department of State reported that China may be doing the same. General, do you agree that it's important that we collect against and evaluate and inform our policymakers about our adversaries' adherence to or violation of international arms control agreements?
Senator, yes, I do.
And do you assess that Russia and China are violating the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty?
Senator, I would like to take that question for the record and get back to you.
Director Haynes, do you have an opinion on that point?
Thank you, Senator. I think I don't believe that the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty is in force, but like General Berrier, I think it would be better for us to take it for the record and provide you a comprehensive answer.
Okay. Thank you both. Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Let me now recognize Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the witnesses being here today. Director Haynes, congratulations on your confirmation. General, good to see you again, as always. Let me begin with a kind of a basic question. Director, do you track communications between private citizens and known terrorists?
Senator, I think there are obviously parts of the intelligence community that do track communications that may be between terrorists and individual citizens.
By his own admission, as a private citizen, former Secretary of State John Kerry communicated several times with the foreign minister of Iran, the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism. Do you know what happened in any of those calls or communications?
Thank you, Senator. No, I was not privy to any of those calls.
Maybe getting communications or readout of those calls from the intelligence community, I think would be helpful given the current controversies that are surrounding those communications with one of our biggest enemies and biggest state sponsor of terrorism. So I'd like to follow up with the intel community on that. Let me ask another question. You and I spoke a lot about, during your confirmation process, the prospects of the United States becoming the world's energy superpower again, producing more oil than Saudi Arabia, more natural gas than Russia, more renewables than any other country, all of the above energy. Do you believe that status as the world's energy superpower, a net exporter now of energy, degrades or enhances our national security.
Thank you, Senator. I think we did discuss this, and if I recall correctly, you were looking at this question through the lens of whether or not, through our pursuit of renewables and so on, that might actually create challenges
No, I
or
was
change
just,
our...
I had asked, and you had answered
Yeah.
yes, that being the world's energy superpower helps us.
Absolutely, our natural resources, including our energy piece, help us.
Do you agree with that, General? Being a net exporter of energy helps the United States' national security and foreign policy.
Senator, I don't really have an opinion on that. That is
These are not hard questions, come on.
It's
Of course,
not really
the answer
defense
is yes.
intelligence.
What, excuse me?
I said it's not really related to defense intelligence or threats, so I'm not comfortable answering that question.
You don't think that whether we're an energy exporter or importer affects threats to the United States? Is that what you're saying as the head of DIA?
No, what I'm saying is our area of expertise is foundational military intelligence about the threats that our country faces. I don't study the export of energy.
Okay. Let me ask this. Do you believe being a net importer of energy enhances or degrades China's national security? Director.
Thank you, Senator. Honestly, it is not something that I have studied deeply, but I would imagine that their export of energy under certain circumstances is a help. And at the same time, obviously, they'll want to use a fair amount domestically as well, and it would depend on the particular circumstances of what it is that you're looking at.
Here's a article for the record, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to submit it. It's from the Global Times. This is the Communist Party of China's mouthpiece.
Without exception.
U.S. status as net exporter of oil reminds China of energy disadvantages. So the Chinese Communist Party clearly thinks being a net importer of energy creates disadvantages, and they even mention it here that the United States as a net exporter, it helps the United States national security. So the Chinese Communist Party believes that. I certainly hope our intel communities can just say it definitively, that whether it's DIA or the DNI, that being a net exporter of energy, all of the above energy, enhances our national security and foreign policy. Director, you told me that during our confirmation process. I'd just like you to definitively state it here. The reason I'm doing this is we are undertaking policies right now, the Biden administration, to restrict the production of American energy unilaterally. We are importing more Russian oil right now than we have ever before. Is that good or bad for our national security from your perspective relative to our relationship with Russia?
So with respect, Senator, I'm not trying to be obtuse. It's just that, honestly, I think it depends on the particular circumstances. And as a representative of the intelligence community, what I try very hard to do is provide you with what analysts assess with respect to particular situations and give you that assessment so that it can help your decision-making. If you wish to provide us a question for the record about some aspect of our energy piece and how that affects, foreign actors, by all means, we will absolutely do our best to answer it.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Sullivan. Senator Tuberville, if you are ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today. Director Haynes, you made a statement a few minutes ago that China is looking at us as declining. Would you clarify that?
Thank you, Senator. Just clarify it in the sense that...
Declining. You said China is looking at us as basically a declining nation. Could you clarify that?
Sure. Leadership has made various public statements that indicate that they see the United States as a declining power. It's obviously not what I believe, but that is their perception.
Okay. Thank you. Many throw around the stat that U.S. spends more on defense than the next 10 or 12 countries combined. Yes or no? Is that correct, General?
We spend a lot on defense, Senator.
Director Haynes? Thank you. Xi Jinping cements power in the CCP. How concerned are you that he's surrounded by yes men? And General Berrier, based on your intelligence, does this raise the threat level for a miscalculation, especially with regard to Taiwan?
Senator, I think Xi is firmly in control of the party, of the military, and every aspect of Chinese society.
We've had several generals tell us that they know for a fact he has yes men around him and implemented that. Does that concern you, though? I mean, is that different than has been in the past? Other dictators?
Senator, I will take that for the record and come back to you.
Okay, thank you. Director Haynes, has North Korea taken any concrete steps toward complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization at all that we know of?
No, sir.
Thank you. You said a few minutes ago that there was an impact in climate change in other countries across the world that's causing migration. What countries are those?
Senator, we produced reports from the Office of Director of National Intelligence over, I don't know, I think the last 10 years, and we can make some of those available to you. But what we indicate is that the trend lines are such that over the next several decades, particularly in certain parts of Africa, you'll see climate have an impact on essentially conditions in those countries, in these areas in Africa, that is likely to promote migration across the continent at pretty increased levels, essentially.
But that's been forever, though, right? I mean,
No, the climate change is actually accelerating that.
Okay, yeah, okay. It seemed likely, as my colleague Senator King said last week, that a cyber attack will be the first cure to the future of great power conflict. Director Haynes, what can the United States do to deter our adversaries from cyber attacks? I mean, what's the best thing that we can do now?
So, Senator, I think this is largely a policy question that our policy folks work on, but I think as a general matter, obviously there are a variety of theories of deterrence. Part of it is indicating red lines, saying if you do this, we will do something that will cost you essentially as a consequence, working with coalition partners, allies to raise the cost essentially of taking those actions, also promoting resilience generally so that the effect of their actions are not as damaging as they might otherwise be, variety of things that can be done to create essentially a framework of deterrence.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Senator Tuberville. Now let me recognize via WebEx Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses today for being there. Director Haynes, I have a question for you. Pardon me. One of the things that we have seen, and one of the things we know, is that the intelligence community's reports, periodic reports, are helpful when we're trying to quantify threats and prepare for some of these black swan events, which COVID-19 is one of those. So what I would like to know, are there resources, collection methods, authorities that would better and more comprehensively support the work of the intel community's ability to exercise some of this foresight? And I ask this question in regard to Russia and China and some of their participation. And also, if there is a way for interagency share on some of these resources and information.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I think we are going to be obviously submitting a budget in the context of the present budget, and that will indicate, I think, the resources that we're looking for to try to promote the work that we do in this area. And beyond that, I think probably best to leave it to the budget. If there are particular thoughts that you have on things that we can do better in this respect, please don't hesitate to let us know, obviously.
Well, this would need to be things that you all say we're missing or you need more of. And I appreciate General Berrier's statement, and I will come to you with this part of the question. When we look at China and Russia and how they have expanded their security ties, and I would be curious, to what degree do you assess this closeness between Russia and China? And I would add to that Iran and North Korea, and those four comprising a new axis of evil. But in what way do you attribute this to a growing relationship between Putin and Xi, and between the leadership of these countries? And how do you assess these countries' unwillingness, pardon me, to agree to a formal alliance? General, to you.
Senator, thank you for that question. We see some cooperation between China and Russia, and I would say that it is opportunistic and transactional. I think neither country would prefer to have a deep military alliance. It provides them flexibility not to actually have that. There probably is some cooperation between all four of the countries you mentioned on some level, and we can go into more detail on that in the closed session. But if you wouldn't mind, I would like to go back to your question about the pandemic. You may know that DIA has the National Center for Medical Intelligence, and in this organization at Fort Detrick, we put analysts and scientists together, and we use a variety of methods, from open source intelligence to sensitive reporting, to try and understand the pandemic and everything that's happened, as well as medical phenomena going on around the world. So that is a unique jewel in the crown for DIA and for the IC, quite frankly. I think we have the right authorities in place, and as the director said, in the budget, we'll be looking for continued funding for that center.
Okay, let me ask you this. When we talk about Russia and China and naval cooperation, how do you see this affecting the Indo-Pacific, with Russia having added 15 new warships and support vessels to their Pacific fleet?
So certainly something that we should keep an eye on with our Indo-PACOM partners. Obviously, more forces there requires more intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance assets to keep an eye on it, and we will watch out for additional partnership between PLAN and Russian Navy forces.
And I would also, and this may be better for our closed session, but to know how you assess Russia's geopolitical understanding of or participation in China's Belt and Road Initiative.
I'd be happy to discuss that in the closed session.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Now, let me recognize via WebEx Senator Manchin. Senator Manchin is obviously having some problems communicating. Okay. Apparently, Senator Manchin is not available at this time to WebEx his questions. Since there are no other members seeking recognition, let me thank the witnesses for their testimony in this open session. Immediately upon adjournment of the open session, we'll retire to SVC 217 for a classified briefing on these issues. Again, thank you, Madam Director. Thank you, General. And I will declare the open session adjourned.